When my husband beat me nearly to death on the cold wooden floor of our Montana ranch, I finally understood what 8 years of abuse had stolen from me, my voice, my daughter, and the woman I used to be. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, 58, once a teacher who told children that words held power. My husband, Clayton Hartwell, 62, the wealthiest rancher in the territory, a man who learned violence by watching his father beat his mother to death. For 8 years, I lost everything: my freedom, my career, my income, my daughter, and more ribs than I can count. And how did he repay me? With brutality. If you're watching this and you feel afraid no one will believe you because he's powerful, afraid it's too late to escape, afraid you're alone in your pain, you're wrong, your life isn't over, it's waiting for you to reclaim your voice. And the next chapter might be the strongest one you ever write. If an old frontier school teacher in 1882, with no hotline, no protection laws, could still find justice, then so can you. My story begins here. I woke before dawn on that September morning in 1882, the way I'd woken every morning for 8 years, listening. In the darkness, I could hear Clayton's breathing, steady and deep. Good. That meant I had time. I slipped from the bed without disturbing the quilts, my bare feet finding the cold floorboards by memory. 58 years old, and I moved through my own bedroom like a thief. Through the window, the first gray light touched the peaks of the Rockies. Montana mornings were beautiful. Even now, even after everything, I could still see that. It was something he hadn't taken from me yet. I dressed by feel in the dim light, the dark blue calico with the high collar, long sleeves despite the September warmth. Not because of vanity, because questions led to lies, and lies required energy I couldn't spare. I'd been a school teacher once, back in St. Louis. I'd stood before classrooms and taught children that words had power, that education opened doors. I'd believed it too. Funny, the things we believe before life teaches us otherwise. The kitchen was my domain. I knew every inch of it, where the floorboards creaked, which stove damper drew best. I'd learned to find competence where I could, small victories in the daily campaign of survival. The wood stove came to life under my hands, obedient in a way nothing else in my life was. By the time Clayton entered, I had biscuits browning and coffee strong enough to strip rust. He didn't greet me. We'd long since dispensed with such pleasantries. He simply poured coffee and stood at the window, surveying his kingdom, 5,000 acres of Montana grassland, cattle bearing his brand. "North Range today," he said, not looking at me. "I want the house cleaned, my shirts mended, supper at 6, steak, medium rare. You understand?" Yes, Clayton. I'd learned to keep my voice level, neither defiant nor fearful, just factual. He set his cup down, not quite a slam, but not gentle either. A statement, a reminder. "Try not to ruin the meat this time." I nodded. There was no point in reminding him that last week's steak had been exactly as he'd ordered it. His memory was selective, editing reality to justify whatever he needed to justify. After he rode out, I stood at the window and watched him disappear toward the northern hills. The ranch hands were emerging from the bunkhouse. Good men, most of them. They knew, I thought. They had to know. But what could they do? The nearest law was Sheriff Calhoun in Copper Ridge, 12 miles away. The nearest neighbor was Widow Pritchard, 3 miles south. Out here, a man's home was his castle. I turned from the window and began my day. The work was familiar, almost meditative. Haul water from the well, scrub the floors, beat the rugs, mend the shirts with tiny invisible stitches because anything less wasn't acceptable. I'd been a school teacher, but I'd become an expert in domestic perfection. Survival required it. By late afternoon, I was in the garden picking beans, my hands moving automatically while my mind wandered to the daughter I hadn't seen in 6 years. Maggie would be 32 now. Did she ever think of me? Did she wonder why I'd stopped writing? Or had Clayton's letters, the ones he'd written in my name, convinced her I'd simply moved on? That thought hurt worse than anything else. At 5:30, I began preparing supper with the focused attention of a general planning a campaign. The steak went into the cast iron skillet at precisely the right moment. I watched it like a hawk turning it once. Medium rare, not medium, not rare, medium rare. At 6 o'clock, I heard his horse in the yard. My hands were steady as I plated the food. After 8 years, I'd learned to control the shaking, to push it down deep where it couldn't be seen. I set his plate at the head of the table and stepped back. The door opened. Clayton filled the doorframe, backlit by the setting sun. He looked at the table, looked at me, and I saw it, that subtle shift in his expression, the tightening around his eyes. I kept my face neutral and my hands still. Whatever was coming, I'd survive it. I always did. That was my talent now. Not teaching, not inspiring young minds, just surviving, one day at a time. I lived like this for 8 years, surviving with whatever dignity I could salvage. Here's my question. When survival requires silence, who's responsible for breaking it? The victim who's too afraid to speak, or the neighbors who see the signs and look away? Clayton stood in the doorway, his shadow falling across the kitchen floor like a stain. He looked at the table I'd set so carefully, looked at the steak I'd cooked to perfection, looked at me. "What time is it?" he asked, his voice quiet. Too quiet. I glanced at the mantel clock. 6 o'clock, Clayton. Just like you asked. Just like I asked, he repeated, still not moving. Then he walked to the table, cut into the steak, examined it. I watched his jaw work, watched the muscle twitch below his ear. This is overdone. It wasn't. I knew it wasn't. I'd watched that steak like my life depended on it, which, as it turned out, it did. Clayton, don't. He held up one hand, almost gentle. Don't make excuses. Don't lie to me. I work all day on that range, busting my back to keep this ranch running, to keep you fed and clothed, and this is the thanks I get? Ruined meat? It's not ruined. It's exactly... His hand connected with my face before I saw it coming. The slap knocked me sideways into the table, sent plates clattering. I tasted blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. I said, don't talk back to me. I should have stayed down, should have apologized, begged forgiveness, played the role I'd perfected over 8 years. But something in me, some last shred of the woman I used to be, made me straighten up and say, I cooked it exactly how you asked. That's when everything changed. He grabbed me by the throat and slammed me against the wall so hard I heard something crack inside my chest. The pain was blinding. I couldn't breathe. His face was inches from mine, twisted with rage I'd never seen before, not in 8 years of violence. You think you can talk to me like that? You think you're still that schoolteacher from St. Louis? You're nothing. You're mine. And I'll teach you what happens when you forget that. He let go, and I collapsed, gasping. Before I could move, his boot caught me in the ribs. Once, twice, 3 times. I heard more cracking, felt something tear inside. I tried to curl up, to protect myself, but he grabbed my hair and yanked me upright. The next few minutes blurred together, his fists, the leather belt from his waist, something hard, the rifle butt I realized distantly, connecting with my temple. I begged him to stop. I apologized for things I hadn't done. I promised to be better, to try harder, to never talk back again. He didn't stop. At some point, the pain became so enormous it stopped being pain at all. It became a roaring white noise that filled my head. I remember thinking about Maggie, about how I'd never see her again, about how they'd find my body out here and Clayton would say I fell, and everyone would believe him because everyone always believed him. Then the white noise turned black, and I felt nothing at all. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When awareness started to creep back, I was moving, jostling, rough movement that sent fresh waves of agony through my broken body. I tried to open my eyes, but only one would open. Through it, I saw stars overhead, cold air on my face, the creak of wagon wheels, Clayton's voice muttering to himself, "Damn it! Damn it! Wake up! Come on, Eleanor, wake up! Don't you dare die on me! Not like this!" Not because he cared. I understood that even through the haze of pain, because if I died, there would be questions. Fell from her horse, he was saying, rehearsing. Hit the fence post. Found her in the yard. I'm a concerned husband. Just a concerned husband bringing his wife to the doctor. I tried to speak, to tell him I knew what he was doing, but my mouth wouldn't work. Everything hurt. Everything was broken. The wagon jolted over a rut, and I must have made some sound because Clayton glanced back. "Stay quiet," he hissed. "You hear me? Stay quiet and let me handle this." Through my one working eye, I saw lights ahead. Copper Ridge, the infirmary, and standing in the doorway with an oil lamp, his face sharp with immediate suspicion, was Dr. Samuel Brennan. You want to know the worst part? In that moment, as Clayton carried me toward the doctor's door, part of me hoped I would just die. After 8 years of this, death seemed easier than survival. Does that make me weak? Or does it make me human? Tell me, have you ever been so broken that the end felt like mercy? Dr. Samuel Brennan had been a frontier physician for 12 years, long enough to recognize the difference between an accident and a lie. The moment Clayton Hartwell carried his wife through the infirmary door, Brennan knew he was looking at the latter. "She fell from her horse," Hartwell was saying, his voice tight with what might have been concern if you didn't look too closely at his eyes. "Hit a fence post. I found her in the yard, unconscious. I got here as fast as I could." Brennan nodded, already moving to help transfer Mrs. Hartwell to the examination table. She was barely conscious, one eye swollen completely shut, blood crusted on her temple. "When did this happen?" "About 2 hours ago, maybe 3. I rode out to check the stock after supper, and when I came back, put her down here." Gently. Brennan cut him off, not interested in the elaboration. Liars always elaborated. He lit 2 more oil lamps, flooding the small examination room with light. Mrs. Hartwell moaned softly as he began his assessment. Broken nose, definitely. Severe head trauma. He palpated her ribs carefully and felt at least 3 fractures, maybe more. Her left cheekbone was fractured, bruising around her throat in the distinctive pattern of finger marks. But it was the old injuries that told the real story. Scars on her back, thin and parallel, whip marks, healed over. A badly set fracture in her left wrist, probably a year old. Bruises in various stages of healing covering her torso, purple, yellow, green. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone who'd seen it before, and Brennan had seen it too many times on this frontier. "Mr. Hartwell," he said, not looking up from his examination, "these injuries are not consistent with a fall from a horse." "What are you suggesting, doctor?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what I see." Brennan straightened, met Hartwell's eyes directly. "Your wife has been beaten, repeatedly, over a long period of time." Hartwell's face darkened. "Now, you listen here." "No, you listen." Brennan kept his voice level, professional. "I've treated ranch accidents for 12 years. I know what a fall looks like. I know what a kick from a horse looks like. This is neither." "You calling me a liar?" Before Brennan could respond, the door opened. Mary Whitehorse, Singing Bird, as her Blackfoot family called her, entered carrying her medicine bag. Brennan had sent his assistant to fetch her 20 minutes ago. She took one look at Eleanor Hartwell's battered body and her expression shifted into something ancient and knowing. She moved to the table silently, began examining Eleanor with gentle hands. When she touched the old whip scars on Eleanor's back, she looked up at Brennan and gave a single, small nod. She knew. She'd lived it herself years ago, before her white traitor husband drank himself to death, and she'd returned to her people. Mrs. Whitehorse assists me with all serious cases, Brennan said to Hartwell, though he didn't owe the man an explanation. She's the best healer in the territory. Hartwell's jaw tightened. I don't need some Indian woman. You don't need anything, Mr. Hartwell. Your wife does. Brennan turned his back on the man deliberately, a calculated insult. Mary, prepare a poultice for the head wound. I need to set her nose and bind these ribs. As he worked, Eleanor began to stir, consciousness returning in painful increments. Her one working eye opened, unfocused, terrified. She saw her husband and tried to speak, but only a whimper emerged. Singing Bird leaned close, whispered something in Blackfoot, words of comfort, of strength. Eleanor's eye fixed on her, and something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, the silent language of women who've survived men's fists. Mr. Hartwell, Brennan said, straightening again, I'm going to ask you to step outside. I need to complete my examination, and your presence is distressing your wife. I'm not going anywhere. She's my wife, and she's my patient. You can wait in the front room, or you can leave entirely. Those are your options. Hartwell took a step forward, looming. He was a big man, used to using his size to intimidate. You know who I am in this town? You know what I can do to you? Brennan held his ground. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Hartwell, and I know what you've done to your wife. Now get out of my examination room. For a long moment, the two men stood facing each other. Then Hartwell smiled. Cold, dangerous. You're making a mistake, Doctor. A big mistake. He turned toward the door, but paused. I'll be right outside, Eleanor. Right outside. Don't you forget that. The threat hung in the air after he left. Singing Bird looked at Brennan. Sheriff? She asked quietly. Already sent for him, Brennan replied. He should be here within the hour. He looked down at Eleanor, whose one eye was now filled with tears. Mrs. Hartwell, I need you to know something. You're safe here, and I'm going to document every injury I see. Do you understand? Eleanor's eye closed. One tear traced down her battered cheek. Outside, they could hear Clayton pacing, waiting, watching. Sheriff Thomas Calhoun had been lawman in Copper Ridge for 8 years. He'd faced down claim jumpers, cattle rustlers, and drunken miners with loaded guns. But walking into that infirmary at 4 a.m. to confront Clayton Hartwell, that took a different kind of courage. He found Dr. Brennan in the examination room, standing between Mrs. Hartwell on the table and Clayton pacing like a caged animal near the door. The Blackfoot woman, Mary Whitehorse, was applying some kind of poultice to Mrs. Hartwell's temple. The air was thick with tension and the metallic smell of blood. Sheriff, Brennan's voice was steady. Thank you for coming. Calhoun nodded, his eyes taking in the scene. Mrs. Hartwell's face was a ruin. One eye swollen shut, nose clearly broken, bruises blooming across her cheekbone. He'd seen plenty of injuries in his time. These didn't look like any horse accident he'd ever witnessed. Clayton, he said carefully, Doc says there's been an accident. That's right. Hartwell stepped forward, his charm sliding back into place like a mask. Eleanor fell from her horse, hit a fence post. I brought her straight here. Sheriff, Brennan interrupted, I need to show you something. He gestured to Eleanor's exposed torso, covered modestly with a sheet but revealing the pattern of bruises. These injuries span weeks, possibly months, different stages of healing. There are old fractures, whip scars. This is not an accident. This is sustained, deliberate violence. Calhoun felt his stomach turn. He'd suspected for years that something wasn't right at the Bar H ranch. He'd seen Mrs. Hartwell in town occasionally, always covered neck to wrist despite the heat, always quiet, always watchful. But suspecting and knowing were different things. "That's ridiculous," Clayton said, his voice hardening. "She's clumsy. Always has been. She bruises easy. Tell him, Eleanor." At the sound of his voice, Eleanor's one working eye flew open. She saw Clayton standing there, and a sound escaped her throat. Not quite a scream, but close. Pure terror. She tried to push herself up, tried to get away, and the movement made her cry out in pain. Singing Bird was there immediately, hands gentle but firm, keeping Eleanor still. She whispered something in Blackfoot, soothing. That reaction told Calhoun everything he needed to know. "Mr. Hartwell," he said, and his voice came out harder than he'd intended, "I'm going to need you to come with me. For questioning." "Questioning?" Clayton's face darkened. "About what? My wife had an accident. I brought her to the doctor. I've done nothing wrong." "Then you won't mind answering some questions at my office." "I mind plenty. You know who I am in this town? You know what I can do? I sit on the town council. I employ half the men in this county. You really want to make an enemy of me over some hysterical woman's lies?" Calhoun felt the old fear rise up. Fear of Clayton's money, his influence, his power to ruin a man's life with a word. But then he looked at Eleanor Hartwell, trembling on that table, terrified of her own husband, and he thought about his own wife at home, his daughters sleeping safe in their beds. "I know exactly who you are," Calhoun said quietly, "and I know what I'm looking at here. You're coming with me. Now." Clayton took a step forward, looming. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." "Maybe." Calhoun's hand moved to his gun belt, not drawing, just resting there. A reminder. "But I took an oath to protect people in this town. That includes Mrs. Hartwell." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Calhoun called out, "Jenkins! Morrison! Get in here." 2 deputies appeared in the doorway, hands on their own guns. "Escort Mr. Hartwell to the jail. He's being held for questioning regarding assault." "This is outrageous," Clayton's voice rose. "I'll have your badge, Calhoun. I'll ruin you. All of you." But the deputies were already moving, taking his arms. Clayton struggled, still shouting threats as they led him out. His voice echoed down the street. "You're dead, Eleanor. You hear me? Dead. And everyone who helped you." Then he was gone, and the infirmary fell silent, except for Eleanor's ragged breathing. She collapsed back onto the table, shaking uncontrollably. Singing Bird sat beside her and began humming softly, a Blackfoot healing song, low and rhythmic. Calhoun looked at Brennan. "You'll document everything? For the territorial marshal?" "Already done." "Good." Calhoun rubbed his face, suddenly exhausted. "Because you're right, Doc. I just made the biggest enemy of my life." Sheriff Calhoun knew arresting Clayton could cost him everything. His job, his reputation, maybe even his life. But he did it anyway. Here's my question. When doing the right thing means losing everything you've worked for, when it means putting your family at risk, how do you choose? Is it courage or foolishness? And honestly, could you have done what he did? After they took Clayton away, I couldn't stop shaking. My whole body trembled like I was freezing, though the infirmary was warm. Singing Bird pulled a chair close to the examination table and sat beside me, her presence steady and calm. "I know your pain, sister," she said softly, her English accented but clear. She switched to Blackfoot for a moment, words I didn't understand but felt in my bones, then back to English. "My husband's fist taught me the same lessons. 5 years I lived with that white traitor. 5 years of bruises and broken bones and fear. But I survived. I went back to my people, and now I help other women survive too." Something broke open inside me. All the tears I'd held back for 8 years, because crying made Clayton angrier, because tears were weakness, because I had to stay numb to survive, they came pouring out. Great heaving sobs that made my broken ribs scream, but I couldn't stop. Singing Bird didn't try to stop me. She just held my hand and let me cry, occasionally humming that healing song, occasionally murmuring words in Blackfoot that sounded like prayers. When the storm finally passed, Dr. Brennan approached gently. He'd been standing back, giving us space, but now he pulled up another chair. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, his voice kind, "I need to document your injuries for the territorial marshal, but I also need your testimony, your words. Only if you're ready, only if you can." I looked at him through my one working eye. This man who'd stood up to Clayton, who'd risked everything to help me. "I'm ready," I whispered. He pulled out a leather journal and a pencil. "Take your time. Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the first slap, 6 months after our wedding, how Clayton had apologized, cried, promised it would never happen again, how I'd believed him. I told him how the violence escalated. Once a month became once a week, became daily. How he'd use his fists, his belt, whatever was handy. How he'd aim for places that wouldn't show. My ribs, my back, my stomach. I told him about the isolation. How he'd cut me off from my daughter Maggie, writing letters in my name saying I was too busy to visit. How he'd prevented me from going to church, to town, to anywhere I might find help. I told him about the time I tried to escape 3 years ago. How I'd packed a bag and tried to ride to Copper Ridge. How Clayton had caught me before I'd gone 2 miles. How he dragged me back and beaten me worse than ever before. How he'd shot my horse, a mare named Daisy that had been gentle and sweet, while I watched. "So you remember what happens when you try to leave me," he'd said. I told him about the constant threats. "Accidents happen to women out here all the time. No one would question it if you fell down the well, or got kicked by a horse, or just disappeared." My voice grew stronger as I spoke. 8 years of silence. Breaking. "Every day," I said. "Every single day for 8 years. He hurt me. Sometimes it was just words, telling me I was worthless, stupid, that no one would believe me if I told. Sometimes it was his fists, sometimes worse. And I stayed silent because I was terrified, because I thought if I just tried harder, was more perfect, he'd stop. But he never stopped. He was never going to stop. Dr. Brennan wrote it all down, his hand moving steadily across the page. When I finished, he looked up. "Mrs. Hartwell, you're not safe here. Clayton has friends, money, power. I'm sending you to Widow Pritchard's ranch. She's expecting you. You'll stay there until the territorial marshal arrives and we can ensure your safety. What if he escapes?" The old fear rose up. "What if he finds me?" "He won't," Sheriff Calhoun said from the doorway. I hadn't noticed him standing there. "I've got 2 deputies watching that jail cell, and the marshal will be here within 2 days. Singing Bird squeezed my hand. "You're not alone anymore, sister. You have people who believe you now." For the first time in 8 years, I let myself hope. Widow Sarah Pritchard's ranch was small, just a cabin, a barn, and 20 acres of grazing land 3 miles south of the Bar H. But to Eleanor, being carried there in Dr. Brennan's wagon, as the sun rose over the Montana plains, it looked like sanctuary. "I've suspected for years," Sarah said, helping Eleanor into the cabin. She was 62, weathered by frontier life, but strong. "I'd see you at church, when Clayton let you come, and I'd notice the long sleeves in summer, the way you flinched when anyone moved too fast. I should have said something. I should have done something." "You couldn't have known," Eleanor whispered, though part of her wondered, could Sarah have helped? Would it have made a difference? Sarah settled Eleanor in a small bedroom with clean sheets and a window overlooking the eastern hills. "You rest now. You're safe here. I've got my rifle and I know how to use it. Eleanor lay down carefully, every movement sending pain through her broken ribs. The room was simple but clean, and through the window she could see the sun climbing higher. She'd survived the night. Clayton was in jail. She'd spoken the truth. But fear still gnawed at her. What if he escaped? What if his money and power bought his freedom? What if he came for her? She must have dozed, because when she woke, Singing Bird was sitting beside the bed, unpacking her medicine bag. The afternoon sun slanted through the window. I brought poultices for your ribs, Singing Bird said, and tea that will help with pain and healing. She began preparing the remedies with practiced hands. My people have used these medicines for generations. They helped me heal after I left my husband. How did you escape? Eleanor asked. Singing Bird's hands paused. He drank himself to death. Whiskey was his other love. One winter night, he passed out in the snow coming home from the trading post. They found him frozen the next morning. She resumed her work. I felt guilty for being relieved, but my grandmother told me the spirits protect those who need protecting in their own way. I went back to my Blackfoot family. They welcomed me home, helped me remember who I was before he broke me. Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes again. I don't know who I am anymore. You will remember, Singing Bird said gently. It takes time, but you will. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah appeared with a man Eleanor recognized, Miguel Torres, Clayton's ranch foreman. He held his hat in his hands, looking nervous. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, his accent thick, I need to speak with you, and with the sheriff. Eleanor's heart raced. Is it Clayton? Has he? No. He's still in jail. Miguel stepped forward. I've come to tell the truth. I've worked at the bar H for 6 years. I've seen what Mr. Hartwell did to you. I heard the screams from the bunkhouse. I saw the bruises when you came out to bring us lunch, and I said nothing. I did nothing. His voice broke. I have 3 daughters back in Mexico. I send them money every month. I told myself I needed the job, that it wasn't my business, that you wouldn't want me to interfere, but I was wrong. I was a coward, and I can't live with that anymore. You want to testify? Eleanor asked. Yes. I'll tell the marshal everything I saw, every beating I heard, every time Mr. Hartwell bragged to the other hands about keeping his woman in line. Miguel's jaw tightened. I should have stopped him. I should have ridden to town and told the sheriff years ago. But I can stop him now. I can make sure he never hurts you again. Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. She wasn't alone. All these years she thought no one knew. No one cared. But they'd known. They'd seen. And now they were speaking up. Thank you, she whispered. Miguel nodded. There's something else you should know. Mr. Hartwell's brother James, he's been at the saloon since dawn, drinking, telling everyone you're a liar, that Clayton's innocent. But Mrs. Hartwell, he hesitated. I've seen James's wife, Sarah. She has bruises too. Maybe if someone asked him the right questions. Miguel Torres watched me suffer for 6 years before he found the courage to speak. 6 years. He's not the villain here. Clayton is. But here's what haunts me. How many people saw what was happening and said nothing? How many times did you see something wrong and tell yourself it wasn't your business? Because silence isn't neutral. Silence protects the abuser, never the victim. So tell me, what would it take for you to speak up? Sheriff Calhoun found James Hartwell at the Copper Ridge Saloon that evening, 3 whiskeys deep and getting louder with each drink. My brother's innocent, James was telling anyone who'd listen. That woman's lying. Clayton would never... James. Calhoun's voice cut through the noise. We need to talk. Outside. In the alley behind the saloon, under the Montana stars, James Hartwell fell apart. You don't understand, he said, sliding down the wall to sit in the dirt. Our father, he beat our mother to death when Clayton was 12 and I was 8. We watched it happen. Watched him hit her over and over until she stopped moving. And the sheriff back then, he ruled it an accident. Said she fell down the stairs. Calhoun felt something cold settle in his stomach. James! Clayton became just like him. And James's voice broke. I hit my wife too. Not as bad as Clayton. Not like father. But I hit her. Until 2 years ago, when Pastor Mills caught me with my fist raised and talked me down. Made me see what I was becoming. I've been trying to fight it ever since. Trying to be better. But Clayton... He looked up, tears streaming down his face. Clayton thinks father was right. Thinks a man has to control his woman with his fists. An hour later, Pastor Mills brought James to the jail. Clayton was pacing his cell like a caged wolf. James! Clayton's face lit up. Finally, tell them this is all a mistake. Tell them Eleanor's lying. James stood at the bars, looking at his older brother. Did you beat her, Clayton? Did you do what they're saying? Clayton's expression hardened. I disciplined my wife, like father disciplined mother, like a man's supposed to. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? You're weak, always have been. Father saw it. That's why he beat you more than me, trying to make you strong, but it didn't work. James stepped back as if he'd been slapped. Father was wrong. What he did to mother, to us, it was wrong. And what you did to Eleanor is wrong. Get out, Clayton snarled. You're dead to me. You're already dead, James said quietly. You just don't know it yet. Late that night, James appeared at Widow Pritchard's door. Eleanor was sitting by the fire with Singing Bird when Sarah brought him in. Mrs. Hartwell, James said, hat in hands, I owe you an apology. I've known for years what Clayton was doing. I heard the rumors, saw the signs, and I said nothing because part of me thought it was normal. Because I'd seen it my whole life. Because I'd done it myself. Eleanor looked at him steadily. But you stopped. I'm trying to. Every day I fight the anger, the urge to, but that's not your burden. I came to tell you I'll testify. I'll tell the territorial marshal about our father, about how Clayton watched him kill our mother, about how Clayton always said father was right, about the pattern, he paused, and about my own wife's bruises, because if I can help stop Clayton, maybe I can stop myself from ever becoming him completely. Eleanor nodded slowly. Thank you. As James left, hoofbeats sounded in the yard. A man dismounted, tall, wearing a marshal's badge that caught the firelight. Mrs. Hartwell? His voice was grave. I'm Territorial Marshal Wade Morrison. I rode through the night after receiving Dr. Brennan's telegram. The circuit judge arrives in 3 days. We're going to trial. Eleanor felt Singing Bird's hand squeeze hers. 3 days. In 3 days, she'd face Clayton in court. In 3 days, she'd have to tell her story again, this time in front of the whole town. In 3 days, she'd find out if frontier justice could protect a woman from her husband's fists. The news spread through Copper Ridge like wildfire. Clayton Hartwell, the richest rancher in the territory, arrested for beating his wife. The town split down the middle. At the emergency town council meeting, the wealthy ranchers closed ranks. A man's home is his castle, declared cattle baron William Sutton. What happens between husband and wife is private business. This sets a dangerous precedent. But at the church that Sunday, a different conversation was happening. Mrs. Chen, who ran the general store with her husband, stood up during the community concerns portion of the service. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. I have something to confess, she said in her accented English. For 6 years, Mrs. Hartwell came to my store. She always bought extra face powder, more than any woman needs. I knew why. I saw the bruises she was trying to cover, and I said nothing. I am ashamed. A murmur ran through the congregation. Then another woman stood, Mary Sullivan, the seamstress. I saw them too, at church socials, when she thought no one was looking. The way she moved like everything hurt. The long sleeves in summer. I told myself it wasn't my place to ask. One by one, women rose. The blacksmith's wife, the hotel owner's daughter, even young Sarah Hartwell, James's wife, stood with tears streaming down her face, though she said nothing. They'd all seen. They'd all known. They'd all stayed silent. Pastor Mills looked out at his congregation with new eyes. We have failed, Mrs. Hartwell. We have failed as a community, and we must do better. But doing better came with a price. The town council summoned Dr. Brennan. 5 men in expensive suits, sitting in the bank's back room. Doctor, said the banker, we've reviewed your contract with the town. We're concerned about your judgment in the Hartwell matter. Brennan stood his ground. My judgment is sound. I documented evidence of systematic abuse spanning years. Nevertheless, we think it would be better if you reconsidered your testimony. Mr. Hartwell is an important member of this community. His economic contributions— I took an oath, Brennan interrupted. First, do no harm. That includes not lying to protect an abuser, no matter how wealthy he is. If you want to terminate my contract, that's your right. But I will not change my testimony. The banker's face reddened. You're making a grave mistake. Perhaps, but I'll sleep at night. The backlash against Singing Bird was uglier. At the general store, she overheard rancher Tom Bradley telling his friends, they're going to let an Indian testify, her word against a white man's. That's not justice. But Pastor Mills, who'd been silent too long about too many things, stepped forward. Mrs. Whitehorse has more Christian charity in her little finger than most of us have in our whole bodies. Her testimony will be heard, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me. Bradley backed down, muttering. The night before the trial, Eleanor sat in Widow Pritchard's parlor, unable to eat, unable to sleep. Tomorrow she'd face Clayton in court. Tomorrow the whole town would hear her story. Tomorrow, hoofbeats in the yard. A knock at the door. Sarah opened it to reveal a young woman, travel-worn and exhausted, clutching a telegram. Mama? Eleanor's heart stopped. Maggie, her daughter, 32 years old now, a woman Eleanor barely recognized, crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into a careful embrace, mindful of her injuries. Dr. Brennan sent a telegram, Maggie sobbed. He told me everything. Mama, I thought you'd abandoned me. I thought you didn't want me anymore. I didn't know what he was doing to you. Eleanor held her daughter and cried. 6 years. 6 years of forced separation. 6 years of believing Maggie had forgotten her. I'm here now, Maggie whispered. I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Tomorrow, when you face him in court, I'll be right there beside you. For the first time since this nightmare began, Eleanor felt something stronger than fear. She felt ready. The Copper Ridge Church had never been so packed. Circuit Judge Harrison Wade sat at a makeshift bench where the altar usually stood. Clayton Hartwell, in his best suit, looked confident beside his Helena lawyer. Eleanor sat across the aisle, Maggie's hand in hers. When Judge Wade called her name, she stood. She told them everything. The first slap 6 months after their wedding. How Clayton apologized, promised it would never happen again. How she'd believed him. How the violence escalated. Once a month became daily. Fists, belt, rifle butt. Always where bruises wouldn't show. She told them about the isolation. How Clayton wrote letters to Maggie in her name, saying she was too busy to visit. How he prevented her from going to church, to town, to anywhere she might find help. Her voice broke, describing the escape attempt 3 years ago. Clayton caught me 2 miles from the ranch. He beat me worse than ever. Then he shot my horse while I watched. He said, "So you remember what happens when you try to leave me." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. She described the final beating, the steak he'd called overdone, his fists, the rifle butt to her head. 8 years of daily violence, 8 years of terror, and he would have killed me eventually. If Dr. Brennan hadn't seen the truth, I'd be dead. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom except Clayton's. Dr. Brennan testified next, presenting his medical documentation. The defense tried to suggest Eleanor was clumsy, but Brennan shut it down. "I've been a frontier physician for 12 years. I know the difference between an accident and systematic abuse." Singing Bird took the stand. The defense attorney objected. "Can we trust an Indian woman's testimony?" Judge Wade's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "This court recognizes all truthful testimony regardless of race. Mrs. Whitehorse will be heard. Object again, and I'll hold you in contempt." Singing Bird testified about Eleanor's injuries, about recognizing the abuse pattern, about Eleanor's terror when she saw Clayton. Miguel Torres testified about witnessing abuse for 6 years, about hearing screams from the bunkhouse, about Clayton bragging about keeping his woman in line. James Hartwell testified last about their father beating their mother to death, about how Clayton had watched and learned, about the cycle of violence spanning generations. Judge Wade didn't leave the bench to deliberate. "I've heard enough. Clayton Hartwell, stand." Clayton stood, still confident. "On all counts of assault, battery, and false imprisonment, I find you guilty. You are sentenced to 12 years hard labor at the Territorial Prison. Bailiff, remove the prisoner." Clayton's face went white, then red with rage. As deputies moved toward him, he lunged at Eleanor, screaming, "You'll pay for this! I'll get out, and I'll—" The deputies tackled him, wrestled him into chains. His threats echoed as they dragged him out. Eleanor stood tall, Maggie on one side, Singing Bird on the other. She didn't flinch. She watched justice being served. 6 months have passed since that September night when Clayton nearly killed me. It's spring now, April 1883, and Montana has never looked more beautiful. I'm standing in front of my own schoolhouse in Copper Ridge. 1 room, 12 desks, a wood stove, and a chalkboard. It's not much, but it's mine. The sign above the door reads, "Hartwell School for Reading and Women's Education." I kept the name, not to honor Clayton, but to reclaim it, to make it mean something different. My students are arriving now. Young Billy Chen, whose mother spoke up for me at church. Miguel Torres's nephew, learning his letters. 2 Blackfoot children from Chief Runs with Horses' band. Their presence a bridge between our communities. And in the evenings, the women come. Frontier wives, ranch women, even James Hartwell's wife, Sarah. I teach them to read, yes, but I also teach them the signs of abuse, how to make a safety plan, where to find help. Singing Bird assists me 3 days a week. She teaches them Blackfoot wisdom about strength and survival, about healing from trauma, about remembering who you were before someone tried to break you. The Bar H Ranch was sold. I used the money to buy this schoolhouse and a small boarding house that Maggie and I run together. My daughter, my beautiful, strong daughter, moved from Denver to be with me. We're healing together, rebuilding the years Clayton stole from us. Last month, Chief Runs with Horses came to town with a delegation from his band. In a ceremony attended by half of Copper Ridge, he gave me a Blackfoot name, Woman Who Speaks Truth. He said my courage in speaking against a powerful man had inspired his people, had shown that justice was possible even on this harsh frontier. I cried, not from pain this time, but from honor. This morning, as I prepare my lessons, Maggie brings me coffee. Widow Pritchard stops by with fresh bread. Dr. Brennan waves from across the street, heading to his infirmary. Sheriff Calhoun tips his hat as he makes his rounds. I have a community now, a real one, built on truth instead of silence. Clayton is in territorial prison, breaking rocks under the Montana sun. He has 10 more years to serve. Sometimes I still wake up afraid, still hear his voice threatening me. The trauma doesn't just disappear, but I'm learning to live with it, to carry it without letting it crush me. I'm 59 years old. I've survived what should have killed me, and now I'm using that survival to help others. Through my classroom window, I can see the Rocky Mountains, their peaks still snow-capped even in spring. They remind me that beautiful things can be harsh, that survival requires strength, that winter always gives way to spring eventually. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. I'm teaching. I'm healing. I'm helping other women find their voices before it's too late. This is my new life. This is my purpose. This is my freedom. And somewhere out there, there's another woman living in fear, thinking she's alone, thinking there's no way out. I'm here to tell her there is. There always is. You just have to find your voice and speak. The Montana frontier taught me something doctors and lawmen couldn't. Survival isn't about being unbreakable. It's about knowing when to bend and when to stand firm. For 8 years, I bent, I survived, but there came a moment when bending meant dying and standing meant living. That's the choice every frontier woman faced, whether fighting blizzards, wild animals, or the most dangerous predator of all, a violent man. The wilderness doesn't forgive weakness, but it rewards courage. That's a truth as old as these mountains. Back in 1882, I had no hotline to call, no shelter to run to, no restraining order to file. But I had allies who chose to see the truth, a doctor who documented evidence, a sheriff who stood up to power, witnesses who finally spoke. Today's survivors have more tools, but they still need the same thing I needed, people who believe them. If you see something, say something. Silence protects abusers, never victims. I'm 77 years old now, still teaching in Copper Ridge. My students call me the lady who wouldn't stay quiet. Every wrinkle on my face tells a story of survival. Every scar reminds me I'm stronger than the man who tried to break me. If an old schoolteacher from the 1880s frontier could find justice, so can you. This story took courage to tell. If it gave you courage too, please like this video, subscribe to hear more stories of frontier women who refuse to be silenced. Comment where you're from. I love knowing this message reaches across time and distance. Together, we break the silence that nearly killed me.